Generali, partner di vita.
In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica, ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia.
Generali, partner di vita.
In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica, ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia.
Buongiorno. Good afternoon to you all from Rimini meeting. Today it's Saturday. Tomorrow the meeting will finish. My name is Elisabetta Soglio. I'm the head of Buone Notizie, an insert of Corriere della Sera, talking about good practices, and the good practices existing in Italy. Fortunately, there are many of them. And this afternoon, we will be talking about a very easy topic: development, sustainability, and subsidiarity, how to make a different future possible. Very easy topic, I have to say. We're talking about it today. Today is the Earth Overshoot Day. Today we have finished the planet resources. We have earned 5 days compared to last year. The bad news is that we have earned 5 days because COVID has forced all countries to stop. However, this gives us food for thought. And this is what we are going to talk about today with our distinguished guests, whom I will introduce: Giorgio Vittadini, the president of the Foundation for Subsidiarity; Professor Stefano Zamagni, president of the Academy of Social Sciences; Mr. Domenico Fanizza, executive director representing Italy and other countries in the International Monetary Fund; and Enrico Giovannini, who is professor of economic statistics at the University of Roma. I will give the floor to Giorgio Vittadini to start. Now, let's introduce this topic. We have some time to talk about it. We could talk about this in theory, but first of all, let's talk about development, because the bet we did during this meeting, talking to Professor Giovannini and many others, is it possible not to talk about degrowth, but to talk about sustainable development? This is the challenge. So what kind of development can Italy have and the world have after the pandemic? Is development possible? Professor Giovannini is not just the main point of reference for sustainability in Italy and worldwide, but he joined the task force providing the guidelines for the next future of sustainability. Therefore, he can talk about development and tell us what we need to do, where we need to go in order to grow, while taking account of the pandemic in a different way. And then we have Professor Zamagni with us, because with reference to the word subsidiarity, which is dear to us and which has been discussed by many experts, as well as Rifting, who says that no society has ever been able to create first a state and then a strong community based on solidarity where state and market can work. He has an idea of subsidiarity, which is not the third sector, but it is a key element, a cornerstone of sustainable development. So sustainability is a topical issue, and I would like to learn a bit more about that today. And then we also have Domenico Fanizza that can help us in giving an outline, giving an international outline. So we will start with you, Mr. Fanizza. What is happening from your observatory, and what are the future prospects? Thank you very much. And thank you to Professor Vittadini and Luigi for inviting me at this event. This event shows how lively the civil society is, and this is very important because civil society will need to play a key role in this transition. Thank you for enabling me to participate for the first time at an event in person without spending my time just in webinars. Now, let's go back to the topic. The key message is that we can indeed work on sustainability and subsidiarity. We do have a tremendous opportunity at present. The crisis has to be seen as an opportunity to transform the development model. Not just because the development model is good, but because this is actually a need. This has not just to do with ethics. It is of vital importance. There is no alternative to that. We are living through very important times, which do not have to be wasted. Everything possible must be done to use the significant resources which are available in developed countries thanks to the unimaginable monetary policy, unimaginable until a few months ago. We no longer have budget constraints, so we can spend money, actually, and we need to spend money in a proper way to accelerate transition and above all, accelerate the adoption of new technologies, as in green technologies. Now, this is a very important topic. And this was underlined at the beginning of the meeting by President Draghi, so spending well and transforming this crisis into an opportunity. Professor Zamagni, following up to what has been said by Vittadini, you always say that this crisis does not only relate to the third sector. What are the opportunities for development that are now existing thanks to this crisis? Thanks to all of you who are connected with us. I'm pleased that this meeting is now being focused on sustainability, development, and subsidiarity. These three keywords are like the three corners of a triangle. Sustainability was first invented in 1793 by a German expert, von Carlowitz, who was the director of the Forest Agency. For the first time, he drafted a design model to decide how many trees should be cut every year to provide enough wood. And on that occasion, he invented the word sustainability. For 150 years, this word was totally forgotten. And we know that economic science, which is my area of expertise, is responsible for that. This is an economic science which is based on the idea whereby development was the same as growth, which is an enormous mistake. We can't make fun of people because growth is one thing, development is something else. Development means eliminating constraints. So development requires freedom. If you don't love freedom, then you don't develop, but you grow. As in, animals grow, but don't develop. Plants grow, but don't develop. Only human beings can develop. It's good to remember that the concept of development makes reference to freedom, which is why subsidiarity is a cornerstone. Subsidiarity is now trendy, yet again. But subsidiarity was first designed in 1200 by the Franciscan school. Think about the Franciscan fathers like Bonaventura, who was teaching at the Sorbonne University in Paris. He was teaching philosophy. And in his writings, he talked about subsidiarity. And he said that in order to make society make progress, the market is not enough on its own. We need to also talk about community or organized civil society. And Rajan, Indian, a writer, was successful with his book where he wrote about state, market and community. But Italians should remember that this concept was anticipated in the year 1200, so it was not created by Rajan. However, in my opinion, we need to be clear. There's two approaches on the topic of subsidiarity. On the one hand, optimization. On the other, full development. And we need to decide where we are. In the optimization process, we say that so far we have followed the linear production model. Then we have an environmental constraint. We need to optimize. Sustainability, in this case, is conceived based on goals, objectives. In other words, we need to understand that environmental resources are scarce and we need to exploit them as best as possible. The other approach says that sustainability is related to man and is for man to ensure the flourishment of human society. The Laudato Si, the encyclical, says that. But this is forgotten. Everyone is talking about the encyclical Laudato Si, but they don't consider that. The Pope says that sustainability is fully such when it ensures the inner peace of people. As in, sustainability must also question the anthropological dimension, not just the ecological, economic and social dimension, which are essential, but it doesn't have to forget the anthropological dimension. And hopefully, Italy will lead a debate, a high-level debate on that. Otherwise, as Giorgio said beforehand, the risk is that we will go back to talking about happy or unhappy, in my opinion, degrowth. So we need to go back to the model of integral, full development. So the four dimensions have to be implemented all together. Now, before asking you the same questions as asked by Vittadini, let's go back to what Professor Zamagni said. In the year 1200, we talked about subsidiarity. In the year 1700, we talked about sustainability. Now there's a crisis. Something has not worked. Well, what worked was that in 1944, the United States knowing that they would win the World War, called economists and statisticians dealing with national accounting. They closed them in a room and they could come out only after they agreed on how to calculate the GDP. Many economy books said that Kushner is the father of the GDP. He was not even invited at the second meeting. The Americans chose the British approach based on the maximization of production. As in a country and development can be as such, can be real only if they can increase production. What was the political problem of the United States at that time? Showing communism that capitalism was able to produce more than communism. So there were no category of welfare, peace, and subsidiarity. Absolutely not. The growth of production also leads to many good things, as in higher income, healthcare, health, education. But there's a basic mistake. So since we have the representatives here with us of two important organizations, one is International Monetary Fund, which is one of the 5 accounting managers worldwide, and the other is the Pontifical Academy. Why can we not rewrite the national accounting systems based on a different idea in order to spur growth while adopting a human logic, a human principle? These laws can be rewritten, redesigned, and that requires a deep review of the system, and this is the right time to do it. The third organization that we're missing here is the European Union, which is now focusing on sustainable development as a paradigm, and the European Statistical Office also is missing. My first proposal is to get engaged into this direction. So let's say rewriting, redesigning national accounting systems. Vittadini was talking about your role in the Colau Commission that at some point was appointed to study how to relaunch the Italian economic recovery. What have you done in that commission? In that commission, you talked about all the keywords that we have just mentioned. So what is the situation? What have you done in that commission? Well, a document has been submitted whereby different priorities had been identified, as said by Gentiloni and Draghi, 3 main priorities: ecological transition, digitization, and innovation, even at a social level and not just at a technological level, as well as fight against inequalities. These were the main keywords on which the document was based and on which the 100 proposals we submitted were based. These are the ideas on which the Next Generation EU is based. Since you play a very important role within the media world, my question is, do we still need to call something as Next Generation EU? And we call it Recovery Fund. The Recovery Fund does not exist. The countries have to prepare a plan for recovery and resilience. But maybe in Italy, we really cannot understand what next generation implies because we don't use this word. Those proposals were then submitted to the government. Now the government should draft this plan for recovery and resilience, and we'll see what it will propose. Rather than just putting projects together, to then have a general context, maybe I think we should decide what the country should look like in 5 or 10 years and then deciding the projects. I also wrote that if the government wants to take some more months, mid-October is the first day and not the last day to submit the plan. Maybe it should take some more time so that the other sectors of society could be involved in defining the plan for the future. Thank you, Mr. Fanizza. Now, we need to rebuild, we need to relaunch the economy, we need to redesign things. However, there are some criticalities. What are the main criticalities, not only in Italy, but also at international level, in your opinion?
Well, to talk about the international level, I would like to start from a very important aspect. I said before that budget constraints are no longer applied. That is true, and this is a very important achievement. At least they no longer apply for the time being. But this does not apply everywhere. There are countries, and specifically low-income countries, and some major emerging countries, which do not have the luxury, like the European Union, Great Britain, and the US, to coin their currency to finance their debts. These countries have witnessed a significant reduction in poverty in the last 15 years, but now with the crisis, they are very much likely to see this trend reversed. And this is an immense tragedy, a significant tragedy. It is not only an ethical imperative that we remember these countries. I mean, of course, this is very important because the COVID pandemic has known no borders and it has imposed lots of sufferings everywhere. But it is an imperative also because these are very important markets for the growth of the European economy and especially for the development of the Italian economy. So for development in general. So for development. This is important. But there too, solutions are not easy. The IMF has adopted significant steps to increase the financial resources for these countries. The G20 temporarily suspended the repayment of debt for these countries. Then there are even some who argue for the cancelling of this debt. But this is something that cannot be done unless we involve the private sector. Otherwise, what we're going to witness will be a net transfer of resources from countries which cancel the debt to private donors. So that's a huge area of reflection. I mean, we need to think well about how we can involve the private sector in solving the debt issue. So the G20, for example, the G20 under the Italian presidency will discuss, for example, exactly this issue next year. So involving the private sector is yet another core issue. We were talking about this with Stefania Brancaccio, who is also in Rimini these days. She's the vice president of UCID. Professor Zamagni. So this is nice theory, but then theory has to be transferred and translated into practice. So in other words, businessmen have to, in a way, embrace this dimension of sustainable subsidiarity and development. So as regards the involvement of the private sector, we should think about the recent agreement concerning Argentina. Argentina was on the brink of its third default over the last 20 years. And this, fortunately, did not take place because the Larian Fee Fund, in particular, as well as other private players, accepted to sit at a table and negotiate with the Argentinian government restructuring of the Argentinian debt. And here lies the issue. I always like to remember that in the Old Testament, there's an aspect for the Jewish culture, every 25 years there was debt remission. And that is because Jews had understood that when you have certain categories of people who get indebted, of course, you cannot but have debt remission after a number of years. Of course, there's wide literature on that. Many people say that, for example, the Jewish culture has not allowed for the development of capitalism. If you admit that you remit the debt every 25 years, well, then the process of capitalistic accumulation cannot function. But that's yet another issue. However, we have to learn a lesson from this. There are cases in which it is useless to insist. Of course, you have to make sure that huge debts are created. But then once they are created, once they are formed, the alternative cannot be that you continue demanding money from those who have to owe the debt. And the private sector have a large room to play here. Last month's Argentinian experience testifies to this, and the same applied also to the country of Chile, because this means that when you want, you can achieve these agreements. Another agreement was reached a number of days ago. There were 14 CEOs of 14 American corporations. They signed an agreement, purpose first economy. So, an economy for which the purpose ranks first, the ultimate goal. So the purpose is basically not the goal per se, but rather the ultimate goal. So in other words, you have to stop acting so that you act only to maximize short-term profit. What you should aim at is long-term profit. The time is ripe. And I believe that it is now high time for us to accept what Professor Giovannini has just recommended. Based on my knowledge of the entrepreneurial world, I can see that a new era has recently started. Of course, there are difficulties. However, major businessmen are telling us that we are experiencing a loss in entrepreneurship. Actually, business schools are really very bad. They do not teach you these things. They continue teaching obsolete models. Colin Clark from the University of Oxford has recently written a very interesting essay on this. He basically wrote that the business schools are lagging behind. Their theoretical models no longer apply, no longer work. And so it's the very same entrepreneurial world that should teach us something. Last year, for example, there were 181 members sitting at the table that taught us something. So probably they were likely to witness yet another stance in this, and this stance will go in the same direction. So I believe that the times are ripe for us to, in a way, make a huge step forward in this respect. So commenting on what Professor Zamagni said, so they sign, they commit themselves, but then is it true that businessmen have embarked on a pathway which is under the premises of ethical and collective business? Well, partly yes, this is not something that can be generalized. And in a moment, I would like to comment on the Italian data. But I would briefly like to comment on what Professor Zamagni said. We, as ASviS, have been demanding the political parties to introduce the principle of sustainable development in our constitution. This principle basically shows this principle of justice, of fairness between generations. Some countries have done that. For example, Norway has done that, and the same have done Belgium, Switzerland, and Finland. So it is not by chance that after the introduction of that principle in France and in Belgium, the article in the civil code regulating the purpose of the company has been modified. In Italy, we have that same logic that corresponds to the cooperative company, based on the fact that the long-term transfer of the accumulated capital is one of the main features of cooperatives. In these two countries, the norms have been modified, and so the focus on short-term profit has also changed. That was basically the result of the capitalism of the last 40 years. This is where legislation can change. As regards Italy, the latest data of the Italian Statistical Office, Istat, has shown that the companies which are thinking about recovery, and this is data dating back to last May, 40% of the companies that had opted for sustainability before the crisis as a tool for recovery, while only 20% of those who had not opted for sustainability are ready to start again. In other words, the crisis has hit both the companies that had opted for sustainability and the ones that hadn't chosen for sustainability. However, the companies that had opted for sustainability are much more ready to recover, and they will probably recover soon. It seems to me that this is a very interesting piece of data to bear in mind, because it shows that development and sustainability can be combined in a different logic. Allow me to ask you yet another question. The Alliance for Sustainable Development aims at achieving the 17 objectives of the UN agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals. So what are the worst criticalities in this respect due to COVID? Well, COVID worsened the situation and dramatically. The UN report for the July Forum actually states that clearly. The worst data refers to goal number 1 concerning poverty, and the World Bank has recently estimated that there will be a sharp increase in poverty. Then health has also been worsened. Then goal 4, education, has also got worse. The problems we have in Italy are basically the problems that almost everywhere are felt. Then gender equality, women are actually the gender that are paying the worst price. Then goal 8, that is to say employment, incomes. Then goal 9, innovation, so companies. Good news is that Europe, and we might address this issue maybe later on, Europe has incorporated Agenda 2030 as its main reference framework for its policies, and because of this, Europe has decided to invest the 200 billion that will be delivered to its member states in these 3 main areas: so ecological transition, digital transition, a fight against inequalities, and resilience, be it social and economic. And that has much to do with freedom and the role of communities. This is shown by almost all surveys, and you just have to think about the way that our territories in Italy have reacted to the various earthquakes. So communities can make the difference when faced with the crisis. They can show how we can restart differently. So Professor Zamagni, can the issue of can communities be a key element to start again? If we think of a kind of economy that is more careful. At the beginning of the 1960s, in the United States, Luther Terry, the general surgeon, so the person in charge of general health, basically had 2 research projects start on the relation between smoking and health. In 1964, these reports were published, and empirical evidence suggests that the fight against tobacco was indeed important. The then American government launched a slogan, "Smoking is stupid." You might say, well then, as the US Statistical Office showed, the percentage of male smokers went from 55 to 17%. So if I just think about the message that was delivered with this drop, we'll have to think that it is not always impositions, be they of a fiscal origin or of any other origin, can bring about good results. It was enough to lever on the community to kind of reverse the trend. If we did a similar move today and started saying that actually polluting is stupid, well, then this might bring about an endogenous change in people's behaviors to go in the desired direction. And in this respect, the Italian experience with COVID, we will soon have also international literature highlighting this. So the Italian experience with COVID will tell us something, will teach us something. The Italians have behaved better than other peoples, but not so much because they were afraid of restrictions or sanctions, rather because they had internalized the correct norm of behavior. And when this happens, well, then people behave correctly. This is the most tangible way we have to have people understand how important the culture provided by communities is. And this is something that only communities living in a given territory can give. If we continue thinking about neostatalistic measures, we will probably fill up our jails, and as you know, they always are combined with huge costs, and so will not obtain the desired effect. This is a fundamental change. Giacinto Dragonetti, a trainee of Dragonesi, said that in 1766 he published a book, and that book talked about the virtues and the awards. That book was translated into 3 languages, and the declaration, the Philadelphia Declaration of Independence of 1776 actually mentions, it quotes Dragonetti in English. And Dragonetti in his book basically stated that if you want things to go on, it's useless to continue on impositions and on suspicion. We have to make sure that awards and rewards are given to virtuous behaviors, because virtues are more contagious than vices. This was said by Aristotle, and Dragonetti took inspiration from him. And we should do the same today. So to answer your question, that is why communities as such are so important. Communities to be intended as such. It is communities who are capable of expressing a culture. There's no other ways. Strict actions based on impositions cannot help us reach the goal, and they can run the risk of ruining the relation-based heritage that we have developed. And we, as Italians, have a comparative advantage on this, because the Italian cultural matrix highlights what we make in common and not the private. Our cultural matrix is connected to the Catholic Mediterranean culture and not to the Calvinist one. So, and for us, what we have in common is to be privileged. So we should not imitate what the others do. The others have their own history, and we should let them behave as they wish and based on their culture. As happened also in the first weeks of this experience, of the COVID experience, we have to follow our own model. Actually, we have a lot of good things to do. Even the same famous Italian poet Leopardi used to say that at the end of the 18th century, Italians are done like that. They're very good, but they are incapable of promoting their own values. And sometimes they are ashamed of their identity and their traditions. The very same Dragonetti said that, well, I have a question. Judging from what our 3 guests have said, it is clear that the GDP is not enough. We have to add other parameters. But if we were to paraphrase Mr. Draghi, good debt and bad debt, we can use these things to, in a way, prevent from work. So what should we intend as a virtuous change, and what should we intend as welfare-based bad behavior, subsidizing, so to say. So we always blame Europe, but I mean, what can we intend as good change in the GDP, and what can we intend that excessive subsidization or lack of interest vis-a-vis the good behavior? Fanizza.
I like the idea that change is made by the private sector and the civil society. I like that. And I like this meeting for that. I do agree that cultural change is useful, but we haven't reached that point yet. There's policies which go to the opposite direction. By chance, the other day, I was looking at a recent survey by the Ministry of the Environment. This is official government data. There's 44 billion euros every year of subsidies. 20 billions of them damage the environment, as calculated by the Ministry for the Environment. But that doesn't stop here. On the other hand, there is another 14 billion euros which are in favor of the environment. So what are we doing? On the one hand, we are spending well. On the other hand, we're not spending well. So it's a waste of resources. So we need to be very practical. Maybe that's because I have a job who's very practical. It is there where we have to concentrate. I believe that governments and policies cannot change the world. This is done by the private sector and the civil society. But they can also make damage. And we need to focus on that. So we have to limit the damage. Yes, definitely. We need at least to limit the damage. Yeah, we need to impose taxes. For example, an example of waste of money for the environment. Just give us an example. Well, for example, subsidies to gas, to diesel fuel, and subsidies to ships using diesel fuel. With Kyoto, we also created subsidies for renewable resources. And this doesn't make sense. We need to decide what to do and go towards the same direction. And it is high time to do it. And hopefully politics will be able to help us. Yes, I think so too. And I think that will happen because if Europe says that ecological transition and digitization are prerequisite, if I was the Dutch Prime Minister, I would say, okay, first of all, let's not give the 20 billion euros, and then we could give you more funds for the environment. ASviS has proposed that for some time. We could reduce the taxes by 10 billion euro every year, and 5 billion could be used and allocated to male and female employment, and 5 billion to help companies in the transition. By 2023, those 20 billion by 2025, we will have to forget the 20 billion. So this is a very good opportunity to accelerate transition. As Vittadini said beforehand, European projects will be checked and cross-checked based on sustainability. There's high speed for people, but not high speed for goods. The tunnels that were built are too small to let containers get through, especially in some areas of Italy. So we need to decide whether we need to use the funds in order to create tunnels, if we want to restructure our railway system for both goods and people. And I think that the European Union, after the decision made, should ask what has the Messina Bridge got to do with that? As the decision has been made by governments, I hope that in the future Italy will be able not only to submit projects, but also to review the use of its funds in order to reallocate them in a proper way. At the same time, now thanks to the special edition and the connection, now we can have some questions from the web. One for Professor Zamagni. Somebody is asking whether you can talk about sustainability as has been described in the encyclical Laudato Si. As economic experts know, there's three categories of assets: private assets, public assets, and common assets. In theory and in practice, we know everything about public and private goods and the rules of governments, but we don't know anything. We don't know how to govern and to efficiently manage common assets. Who says the opposite lies? Because there is no single economic model on common assets. The only model was produced by Elinor Ostrom, who was not an economist. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2009, but she was a political scientist. Then she passed away the next year, unfortunately. So, today we know that the most important thing in the production of goods in relative terms is the production of common assets, because the environment is a common asset. It is not public nor private. So the Laudato, what about the encyclical Laudato Si? Well, in the first paragraph, the encyclical Laudato Si says that we must be brave enough to declare in all laws that the environment is a global common asset, whereas many people say that it is a private asset, so they want to tax the environment. And this has no scientific foundation, unless you believe in some principles. And it is not even a public asset. It is a common asset, just like knowledge and many other common assets. So, the encyclical Laudato Si, which couldn't go beyond that, is that we need to find the ways to manage a common asset, which should not be done by the private nor the public sector. And it is possible to do that because in practical terms, we can do that, but there is no, let's say, theoretical way to do it or political willingness to do it. We do have the creativity to do that, and we have people who have experienced that in person. As the Pope said 3 days ago, he talked about the vaccine patents, and the vaccine for the coronavirus, can that be patented or not? No, because that is a common asset, and common assets cannot be patented. Schumpeter, a great economist in the early 20th century, already wrote that, but we tend to forget that. So then we are there to wait and see who is coming first on the market with a vaccine. So what does the Pope says in the Laudato Si encyclical? That the common asset is important, but we need to change our mindset and our way of thinking, because if we want to deal with these topics based on the economic paradigm, then we will go nowhere. The economic principle can help us only to some extent, but cannot solve the problem. Why shall we not base everything on the human dimension? And what is subsidiarity? Subsidiarity is a very practical way to adopt mutual respect and to help each other mutually. So I do something for you because you're doing something for me. So we're mutually helping each other. Mutuality is connected to subsidiarity. To conclude, Giovannini, do you want to add anything else to the Laudato Si?
Yeah, that's true. This is actually the main remark that we will use to start the festival on sustainable development. We have invited a theologist who's going to show that the very same concept of private property changes if we apply the same principles. Article 42 of the Italian Constitution already makes it possible for the state to expropriate an asset if a person does not use that asset for the common good. Of course, in full respect, in full compliance with private aims. The introduction of these principles might change ways of thinking which are today considered difficult to change or impossible to change. So, Giorgio Vittadini, I am very polemic. Yesterday and today, I had the chance to understand one thing. Yesterday, I participated in the debate among the Italian politicians, and today I heard that there is an implicit alliance between the civil society and what people think and international institutions. International institutions have already grasped what sustainable development means, and people did the same, but yesterday didn't have the same impression. So I think that we should kind of act as a sandwich. We should constrain the Italian politics between international constraints and this bottom-up push from civil society, because all too often we criticize Europe, but it is us, we are the problem. It seems to me that actually we are losing sight this kind of push that is coming from the IMF, although actually the IMF was once considered as our watchdog, so to say. So it seems to me that the political synthesis is that we should force our Italian politicians that we should not blame Europe, but rather choose a model of development that is has long been demanded by people. Probably, if this push comes from both sides, probably we will have this positive outcome towards sustainability and subsidiarity. Subsidiarity, by the way, is not against the state. This is something that I have always said. If you act from the bottom up, actually, and you have tribes working from the bottom, these tribes need a guide. So subsidiarity and, as Fanizza said, state go hand in hand. What does not go hand in hand is populism. So that form of populism that tries and play with these concepts without having a clear prospect. Thanks to Giorgio Vittadini, thanks to you who watched us, and thanks to our dear guests for their food for thought, Domenico Fanizza, Enrico Giovannini, and Stefano Zamagni. The meeting goes on. At 7 p.m. we're going to talk about a very topical issue. We're going to talk about education. Will the schools start again? Thank you very much to everybody, and I wish you a good evening.
Generali, partner di vita.
In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica. Ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia.
Generali, partner di vita.
In Eni oggi coltiviamo delle microalghe che catturano anidride carbonica. Ma non basta. Abbiamo bisogno di Lorenzo, che riutilizza gli oggetti per creare qualcosa di nuovo. Eni più Lorenzo è meglio di Eni. Insieme abbiamo un'altra energia.